welcome to the virtual book tour. The first person that I want to introduce to everybody, of course, is Marsha. Marsha Acker is a professional facilitator, executive, and team coach. She's the founder and CEO of TeamCatapult, and she uses system thinking, structural dynamics, dialogue, and agility to help teams collaborate and align with clarity, purpose, and vision. So we welcome you, Marsha. Thank you for being here as the author of the book. It's very exciting that you're here. And we are here for our second virtual book tour stop. So very, very exciting. Let me introduce the other two speakers here today. We have Zuzi Šochova. She works as an Agile coach and trainer for both large and small organizations. She's a certified Scrum trainer by Scrum Alliance. She has over 15 years of commercial experience in IT. And here is an interesting tidbit about Marsha and Zuzi and Evan. They're all published authors, right? So I think that's pretty cool as I was reading everybody's bio. So Zuzi is the author of two books, The Great Scrum Master, hashtag Scrum Master Way, and The Agile Leader. So welcome, Zuzi. And Zuzi is joining us from the Czech Republic today.
Hello, everyone.
All right. And then I'm going to introduce you to Evan Leybourn. He is the founder and CEO of the Business Agility Institute, an international membership body to both champion and support the next generation of organizations. He also is an author, as I said before. He, as well as leading the Business Agility Institute, he wrote Directing the Agile Organization, as well as hashtag No Project, a culture of continuous value. And Evan is joining us today from Melbourne, Australia.
Good morning for me. Good afternoon for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of time zones here today. It's evening for Zuzi, morning for you, afternoon for Marsha and I. I think it's wonderful. What a wonderful time to live in, right? Be able to meet through Zoom, even though we can't meet in person.
For sure.
The small world.
So I'm going to kick off this conversation today with a very easy question for everybody. And then I'm just going to let you take it away, because being in the green room just a few minutes ago, it was very apparent that you have a wonderful working relationship. So before we get talking about at the Business Agility Conference, which is kind of where some magic happened in March, some craziness but magic. Zuzi and Evan, how did you first meet Marsha? Zuzi, if you want to go first, how did you first meet Marsha? If you can remember how or where, or we'd love to know that.
I do remember it was the Business Agility, right? Where I first time was a facilitator as I volunteer myself, and Marsha was there as well. And then I asked Evan if he needs help with running facilitation. He said, yes, but you should meet Marsha. I was like, okay, well, I mean, why not? It's always great to collaborate, right? And I was a bit, I have to admit, right? I was like, yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to work, because what if she's going to be too detailed oriented and, you know, pushing for all those like tools, and it must be exactly this way. And I don't know, right? But then we met, and I was actually like, yes, we have to do that. That's going to be great. And it was the best experience ever.
Yeah.
That's great. How about you, Evan?
So Marsha was introduced to me by a mutual friend and colleague, and we were looking for someone to help us design the facilitation flow process at the conference. And our friend Ahmed Sidki said, you have to talk to Marsha. She is the world expert at facilitation. And I was a little nervous. It's like it's with like an introduction like that, it's kind of hard to sort of have a conversation with someone. But we sort of had that conversation, and Marsha outlines like her view of what good facilitation looks like, and it's like, done, perfect, you're in. Let's do this.
That's great. So I want to bring the people that are here watching or being part of this conversation into this conversation a little bit. So let's set the stage, right? So Evan, you met Marsha. You were introduced as the best facilitator, Marsha, and you now wrote the book on the art and science of facilitation. You're at the Business Agility Conference in New York City, March of 2020, right? We all know what was happening at that time. But I don't think people realize or might not know, especially those who are watching or here with us today, that aren't in the Agile space necessarily. So they might not understand what that conference was about, but also what was happening at that time. It's probably one of the last in-person conferences that was happening in the world, right? So let's take our viewers back
Literally.
to that, right? And then what happened? Because I think that's the conversation that we want to know about, right? What happened there? So Marsha, do you want to set the stage for that?
Well, yeah, I tie it a little bit together because this is the 2020 conference was actually the second year that Zuzi and I were working together to kind of co-lead the facilitation. And my experience of meeting Zuzi was very similar to, like, I think you don't quite know how you're going to work with someone until you work together. But we had this initial call and you and I started dreaming up what this might look like together. And we were so in sync from that first day forward. So much of the vision that we wanted to have about how facilitation could set people up for success in terms of coming to a conference. Evan has always articulated this vision for the Business Agility Conference, and they're worldwide, but the one in New York is kind of the first one that kicked it off. And we talked about this vision of creating space for people to have conversations, just conversations. Like, I think you go to conferences to talk with people and meet other people and to learn something, but also to take away kind of actionable learning from other participants actually through that dialogue and through conversation. And so Zuzi and I had articulated this. We got a round at it. We thought it went really well in 2019. And then here we are, 2020, and we're chugging along. And I guess January, some of this hubbub had started to make its way to the US about, there's potentially going to be something happening with the worldwide. At that time, it wasn't really referred to as a worldwide anything. But anyway, so I think multiple meetings leading into January and February. We were spending a lot of time on phone calls. Evan, I remember lots of messaging from you, and and I think it was probably the precursor to what we were going to experience. So we didn't quite. I mean, we can look back and tell that story now, but I don't think anybody knew what we were coming into. Zuzi and I were coordinating. So we, if you've never attended a business agility conference, I think one of the things that's important to know about the conference from Evan's, Evan, I'm speaking for you, but at least from the angle is creating a conference unlike any other, where it's about conversation, it's about hearing stories, it's about shorter storytelling aspects from the real world, less about theory, much more about, what does business agility look like? How are people really doing it? What's required of me as a leader to lead a more agile organization? What's required of organizations today as the landscape and context changes? And creating a conference where people could come together and learn from one another. And I think, Evan, that's been part of the, some of the journey that you laid out. And Zuzi and I, you and I spoke about, well, how do we foster, in facilitation, we call it creating containers. How do we create a container at a conference where people can have something beyond the surface level conversation of, well, where do you work and what do you do? We wanted it to go much beyond that. So we were having conversations about who the facilitated. We have a facilitation team, they're amazing. A vetted group of, I guess, 40, right?
Yeah.
I think 40 facilitators coming into the New York conference. And I know a couple of weeks out, Zuzi, you might remember more of the details, but we were losing facilitators as people were sort of weighing this: do I come or do I not?
Every day, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the tee up to what was happening.
And I
So
also to build. Go ahead, Evan.
No, Zuzi, go. I spoke.
I also found like one of those fascinating things was that the motto of the conference, "Art of Possible," right? And it's works so well with the current with the situation we've been dealing with.
Yeah.
And when I was preparing for this conversation, I was searching some of our notes, which we did with Marsha, and I found our high dream for 2020 business agility. So I was thinking I will read it to you, right? It was. We really want that the conference in New York is brings together is that together we create an environment for dialogue and actionable learning that allows participants the freedom of choice, opting in and opting out of activities that don't align for them what they need in that moment. And I think that freedom of choice was one of those core values we try to bring into facilitation, because we really think we are in service of people.
Yeah.
We need to give them that experience and help them to reconnect with the overall vision of Art of Possible.
Love it.
Yeah, that's great.
I love it. I haven't seen that I haven't seen that for a while. That it's a good reminder about just what we're trying to do. So just quickly to reiterate and expand a little bit on what Marsha and Zuzi said. For us, facilitation is a key. It is vitally important to the experience, and the Institute is a community organization, and so communities need space, and if you have space, you need someone to hold that space. It wasn't always that way. The first year we ran the conference, 2017, I still had this vision that we wanted an event where people would spend as much time with each other, engaging with each other, than they would listening to like people standing on a pedestal on the stage. It's I don't know about you, but for me, the value is those corridor conversations. So we wanted to design a conference that sort of encapsulated corridor conversations as part of the event, not just purely opportunistic while you're holding a plate of food. But in 2017, I didn't know what I was doing, to be blunt. And it was overly formal. It was exercises, activities in these sort of deep dive spaces. People enjoyed themselves, but it wasn't the experience that we wanted. And so 2018, learning more about what facilitation is, creating a space for a conversation, and then asking Marsha and Zuzi to come and to lead the creation of that space and helping the facilitators, these amazing 40 women and men, to create an experience for the people around them. And some of you may be familiar with a model called Kano model, K-A-N-O. If you're not, just look at the Wikipedia page on it. It has all you need to know. But there's basically a segment in there which is called delighters. And the key is there are things that you do which are basic. You just have to do them to engage with your customers, or in our case, our members. There are things which are performers, which are things that the more you do, the better the experience. And then there are delighters, which are things that no one expects, but when they're there, they make a substantial difference. And for us, good facilitation, which is something that most people have never really experienced, was something that was a delighter, which is why it's being built this way as we evolved, as we learned what good looks like. And to bring it to 2020, March was, we opened the conference at 9 a.m. or 8:30 in the morning on Wednesday, the 11th, if I'm correct. Whatever the Wednesday was, it was the Wednesday. It might be the 13th, doesn't matter. 2 hours later, I have to get on stage and say that the World Health Organization has just declared a pandemic. And to make it safe for people to leave if they feel that they need to. The rhetoric in the news wasn't helping. It was certainly some miscommunication around borders closing and so forth. So we did have, I know Zuzi was concerned about could she get back to the Czech Republic? We had a contingent from Denmark who literally left. It's like the announcement came, it's like, we're going to the airport because I don't know if we're going to be let back in our country. But I want to bring this back to the facilitators and what was created, because Marsha used the words a moment ago, creating a space, and I wrote them down because I wanted to call back to that. Here, just put yourself in this position, and I can see some names in the chat. I know some of you were there. Put yourself in a position where for 3 months prior to the conference, from January, you've got noise. There's this thing coming out of China, it hits Italy. There's the 1st of March, or like the last week of February, there's 1 case in the United States, Orange County, I think it was. And you start getting companies cancel their tickets, can we get refunds? And the noise just gets more. And so we have these facilitators who took a leadership role in this space. Right? Some stayed home, right? Because they had their concerns. They didn't want to travel. They had lived with elderly parents and who were at risk. Right? Some made the decision to come because at the time you were allowed to do that sort of thing. And to be fair, we didn't know any better. This is sort of pre-social distancing. This is when it's like the advice was like elbow bumps instead of handshakes. No hugs. I literally had one of the facilitators say that they didn't want to live in a world where they couldn't hug someone else.
Wow.
It just tells you the sort of community that you've got. But as the days draw near and the concern and the fear things keep happening, I've already landed in New York. Half the facilitators have landed in New York, where the conference is 50%. Right? Half of them have pulled out. We go from 400 down to 200. But what happened was you saw facilitation at its pinnacle. Right? You saw these, every one of them, a leader in their own right through facilitation, creating and holding a space where people are scared, right? Where people are, they don't know what's going to come, right? They're trying to enjoy the conference, they're trying to listen, they're trying to meet their friends, right? For the last time, apparently, which we didn't know. And these facilitators that Marsha and Zuzi trained and enabled, right, through the facilitation systems and the conversation patterns that they created, the space was held, and everybody, pretty much without exception, had a positive, engaging, enjoyable experience. And if it's the last thing that you did before we all went into lockdown, then you know what? I'm proud of what the facilitators and the experience that they created for everyone who was there, because that's what facilitation, that's what good facilitation is meant to be. They didn't sign up to do it in the middle of a pandemic, but they did a damn good job anyway.
That's awesome. I'm going to ask a question for those that might be watching that aren't necessarily in the Agile space yet. They might be in business. Tell us a little bit more about agility in business, what that looks like, Evan. You have the Business Agility Institute. For somebody who is a leader, but they might have they are looking to lead their team in a different way going forward, or they might be starting their leadership journey. what would something like the Business Agility Institute or the Business Agility Conference, what could that mean for somebody? And what role does facilitation play in that? And I already heard you say a little bit what that was, but could you talk a little bit about that for somebody who doesn't really know this space?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick because I'd be curious to know what Marsha and Zuzi's opinion is as well. But for us, we would define business agility as it is the organizational capability. It is a set of behaviors, a set of ways of working that creates freedom and flexibility inside an organization with your customers, with your employees, in order for an organization to achieve its purpose, no matter what the future brings. And it's those 6 words, no matter what the future brings, that are sort of vitally important. I don't need to know what will happen tomorrow. I just need to know that I can adapt to it, and that my employees are aligned to the vision, that they have autonomy, that they have ownership of their work, such that when things change, the decisions that they make, right, are right for their customers and for themselves. I need to know, I need to have confidence that as an organization, the systems of the organization, without me micromanaging and pulling all the threads, is able to listen to their customers, right, and use that information to create a better experience for their customers. It does, for those in the Agile world, it has a heritage in Agile, but it goes well beyond what you would consider to be an Agile framework. It's not Scrum, and I love Scrum. It's not Scrum. It's not Kanban. It's not SAFe. It draws upon concepts coming as far and wide into accounting standards, HR policies and practices, sales and marketing. And to the second part of your question is of where facilitation fits in. There are key skills that we know leaders in Agile organization, both managers and non-managers, because you don't have to be a manager to be a leader, though all managers should be leaders. Right? There are key skills that leaders need to have, right? The ability to delegate, and delegate outcomes, not just delegate work. The ability to inspire purpose, and inspire aligned to vision. The ability to develop the people in their organization to their whole self, not just what's the latest skill you need to do your job, but how do you be a whole person, a better whole person. And facilitation. Facilitation is one of those key skills that we expect to see in good leaders, because every leader is going to be in a situation, probably daily, right, where they need to facilitate, right? Whether it's a meeting, right, a conversation, whether they need to create a space for creativity to happen or create a space to solve a problem, right? That leader doesn't have and shouldn't have all the answers. And that's where facilitation comes into play. And it is a key skill in leaders in Agile organizations. Would you agree, Marsha?
Here's what I love about Evan. Every word that you just offered up as a definition around what is business agility, you embodied last March. So for anybody who happened to have the gift of being in New York, it was certainly the last time I left the house. And I think about it fondly often. Every part of that conference was about watching you lead with all of the above, with clarity, vision, uncertainty. It wasn't easy. I mean, there were many, I think there were many moments where nobody knew what do you do? There was 0 playbooks written for, there's you couldn't pull up, Google and say, what do you do in a pandemic when you're trying to run a conference? it was just a beautiful example of how to work with uncertainty, how to work in complexity, how to work with the requirements are changing. Like the context, the container keeps changing. It got to the place where it was an hourly, every 30-minute kind of, what's the leadership decision to be made right now? So you talked about the leadership from the facilitators, but none of that would have happened. We talk a lot about leaders bring the weather. So none of that's possible without, everybody playing their part or their role in agility.
Yeah, so this is a good point. And Zuzi, I'm gonna ask the next question of you. So knowing all that and having set the stage there, so then what was the approach, Marsha and Zuzi, that you had and the vision that you had initially for the Business Agility Conference, those deep dives in facilitation and that dialogue that you wanted to have, and how did it change as the world, changed?
I think the vision was still the same, right? We want to show what is possible. We want to bring that container and keep it. And I think it was also due to Evan and Ahmed that they've been able to hold that space for us. So I felt like we created some sort of a bubble there, which, of course, reading the news were sometimes stressful. But outside of that, like when you enter the space of a real conference, I remember I was staying with a group of facilitators, sharing with them some news, like we are supposed to do this, this, and that. And I started because I talked to someone, and then that person walked back and told me, by the way, it's different. It's like this, this, and that, and left. I was like, okay, so now we are not doing what I just said. We are just doing this. And I didn't feel any frustration. I just feel, yeah, that's cool, right? We are change responsive. We like changes in this whole agile space, right? And I was super happy. I'm at the most agile conference I ever been, I guess, because that change just feel completely natural to everyone. And there was, afterwards, it was surprising, but at that moment I felt, yeah, hey, need to change. No worries, we'll do it differently.
So that makes a lot of sense. So talking about the dialogue as it pertains to business agility, what is important and what is challenging about that dialogue that you're having?
I think the dialogue is always challenging because you need to stay really focused on the top and see all those actions, right, you have. So they're like the 4 actions of dialogue, right? There are people who move and come up with a new idea. There are people who oppose. They're saying, no, I disagree with you, right? And there are people who follow and say, yeah, he's right or she's right. And then the bystanders who kind of set it into a different dimension a little bit and say like, hey, you guys disagree with each other, right? Like that. And now if you facilitate a dialogue, you need to find a balance of all those 4 actions, sort of, and figure out like how to have it in a sort of harmony, going around and without it. And that will be ask all the facilitators to sort of keep an eye on in their conversations, because at the end that will improve the quality of the conversation tremendously. And Marsha is an expert on that concept. She actually teach me this, and I was first time I hear about it, I was like, yeah, that's interesting. But then we start actually using it, and I felt like, wow, that's super powerful. So maybe you can speak about this a little bit more.
So one thing, the reason we wanted that facilitation, and I spoke about the experience, but there's something deeper than that. And we realized very early on that everybody has a story. In that room, there's 350, 400 people. I could put pretty much any single one of them on stage, and say, you've got 20 minutes to tell your story. And they have a story to tell. Now, I don't have space for 350 people to stand on stage. I don't have time. So you want to give people the space to tell their story and to hear the diverse stories, not just the ones that we pick and curate. And I think we pick good ones, right? But you want to hear what it is that Marsha has done over in Virginia. You want to hear what has happening in the Czech Republic. You want to hear what's different in Turkey compared to Australia. And that happens when everyone's got a chance to tell their story, which is where the facilitation comes into play, because you give them that space. But not everyone's good at telling a story. It's the other reason we don't put 350 people on stage, is that half of them are probably not great at that. So you need that facilitator to enable the conversation, to make sure that no one dominates, to make sure that the person who's quiet, who has an amazing story, is given the safety and the space to actually tell it, right? And to make sure that as things start to go off the rails, a decision is to be made. Is it correct to go off the rails? Because sometimes those tangents are the most valuable part of the conversation. Or do you bring it back? And a good facilitator is someone who knows where that conversation needs to go, and what is most valuable for those having the conversation at that point in time. And if you start with that position that everyone has a story, it opens up an entire world of possibilities.
Marsha, you want to join?
Yeah, well, I was gonna. There's a piece that Zuzi made me think about that I wrote in the book. It's actually in the very beginning of it, but as you talk about, so I'll just read it real briefly. But it speaks to that that piece about collective intelligence, and I think a little bit about what Evan is sharing right now. So it says, true collaboration is when new ideas are generated from conversation. We do a whole lot of things when we come together, but very seldom do we truly carve out space to be creative and to tap into collective intelligence and to think together. Yet it's only within truly collaborative spaces that teams discover solutions to some of the most complex problems. Facilitation is about taking a stand. It's about creating this space, which is really what Evan is speaking to about that container. It's about creating space for what's needed to help people show up as their most naturally creative selves, voice their point of view authentically, hear different perspectives, develop a shared vision for the future, and decide on a direction forward. Facilitation does not fall for impossible outcomes and unrealistic timeframes. It does not stand for unequal participation. It is for creating engaging and connected spaces where all voices are heard.
That's great. That's wonderful. So from that and everything that happened in March of 2020 at this Business Agility Conference, as the world stopped as we knew it, this pandemic was announced, a pandemic, what lessons or what takeaways, and I think that's probably another whole conversation, but I know that we've all had to change the way we do business, the way we run our lives, the way we meet people, that we can't hug anymore. But as a leader, as a facilitator, what are some of the shifts that you personally have found, whether they're, most likely they were hard initially, but they might end up having been good shifts. So I would love to know your perspective on that as a leader, as a facilitator, on some of the things that have happened since then. Maybe lessons that you learned during the conference, or things that you hold close to your heart because of it. Marsha, you want to go first? Oh, Zuzi, you go first.
Go ahead.
Let me start. I have one which I learned, and it was super interesting to see that happen, because as we said, people start canceling and saying like, hey, I can't travel anymore, and the facilitators actually start canceling and saying like, maybe I don't want to travel anymore, right? So what Evan and his team did, they actually came out with a second parallel virtual conference stream, and they want to give them the similar experience with deep dives and facilitated conversations. And when I first hear about it, I was like, I'm not sure if it's gonna work. There is like no way. But they are crazy enough. They do it even without, they do it without asking me. So I'm not offering my feedback on that, right? But I felt like there is no way you're gonna create it. And then I was actually seeing that happening. And then, of course, the second day, as Evan said, a lot of the people were shifting to actually, even from their hotels in New York, they better go to virtual stream. And I was like, there was such a great response to what was happening. And actually the facilitator team, some of the facilitators joined from face-to-face to virtual as well at the same time. So actually we didn't have much issues because as people were leaving, the facilitators did pretty much statistically the same thing. And that experience actually stayed with me because when I came back to Prague, I still thought 2 days before it's gonna be face-to-face class. But then, of course, it was not. So actually, over the weekend, shifted from face-to-face to the first virtual class. And I think that experience of virtual conference really helped me to say, I'm going to do that. I'm not giving up. I just can create an experience, right? Because it's all about collaboration, all about sharing stories, conversations at the class as well. It's not one-way streaming. So, and I didn't know it was going to work, but I think what I've seen at the conference helped me to bring this self-confidence that it's worth it. And now I'm doing classes which I enjoy. And I think I would keep doing them even once we can do classes face-to-face, not always, but time to time, because it has certain extra things which you can't do face-to-face either.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And Marsha, I know you have some virtual facilitation tips probably that this might be a good time to share some things that you were already doing before the pandemic hit. You were teaching a virtual facilitation class, but then really stepped up and started teaching the leaders in the community on how to do this. And as was evidenced by what Zuzi just shared, both you and Evan were able to pull that off really quickly and make that happen for people and be the leaders that you are.
Zuzi, I have a very similar takeaway from the conference. Like yes, we'd been teaching virtual facilitation probably for about 3 years prior to March of last year. and so there were concepts and principles that were present for me. I think the what felt like, honestly, the pivot, Zuzi, I think you and I were sitting in a conference room Friday morning at the conference as the attendance was dwindling, and we both had sessions Monday morning. We had a 5-day workshop coming up that was supposed to be held in person, and I was wrestling with, how do we adapt? And I think there was the visceral lesson that I learned at that conference was how to lead in uncertainty. And I felt like I started learning that lesson. For those of you who know me, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 3 years ago, and she lives with us now. And I'd say the thing that Alzheimer's started to teach me was, I often said there must have been something that I needed to learn about agility, because it creates this environment where you really don't know. You don't know from day to day what's next. So I started to learn to just work with what you have at the moment and then take the next step. And then what's the next decision? And then that conference was that on steroids. It was hour by hour. How do you adapt? So we can't be face to face. We can't handshake. So we elbow bump or we toe tap, as much as some people were like, what? That was the first time I think I practiced that social norm that then became it got different from there. But I went home, much like Zuzi. I spent the weekend I allowed myself about an hour of a little bit of, well, what do you do now that we can't be face to face? But then it was more, how do you create opportunity? And what I'm so passionate about right now is creating connection. I do think you can create connection online. It's different. It's not the same, and you don't do it quite the same way, but I do think that you can create experience and connection virtually. And you can, in some ways, you get to, it's lovely to be so international these days, to have such cultural diversity. and workshops where you can bring in different, I mean, we don't have it as much if we're face to face. So I think that was one of my biggest lessons from the conference.
That's great. And before I go to Evan, I want to remind all of you that who are watching, if you have a question for the panelists, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. I would love to ask them that question in a minute. Evan, I'm going to turn it to you. What lessons or what was your biggest takeaway from what happened as a leader? What can you speak to?
I think I've said quite a bit about what was happening during the time, but I want to touch maybe a little bit about what happened afterwards. So I couldn't change my flight. So the original plan was I was going to go to Boston and spend St. Patrick's Day with some friends and just enjoy America. And obviously didn't happen. But so I was there in New York until I think the Tuesday the following week. So I'm in this hotel just outside Times Square, and you're seeing Times Square empty out. Almost. So all those photographs and video shots of like this empty Times Square sort of miss the fact that there are shoulder to shoulder video cameras and photographers taking the same shot. So it was like me, 3 other lost tourists, and about 50 film crews all taking that same shot. But what was interesting or what I learned was just being able to see how companies respond or react. Right? So those companies and those people who were, I don't want to say panicking because that's not fair to them, but they were making rapid decisions based on what they knew at the time. But the difference being, they were making those decisions in isolation. There was no connection with the decisions that came before. So, oh, something's changed. I need to do something. I need to do something. And you had companies who would send everyone home, and then, but they wouldn't have things prepared because it was a decision made in isolation. And then you had the companies that responded. Now, quite often they would make the same decision. Right? They'd send everybody home. The difference being is that tomorrow they had to make another decision, and then the day after they had to make another decision, and the day after they had to make another decision. And each decision that was being made was connected to the ones before with new information. Right? And so those decisions, the agility, it wasn't chaos. Right? It was uncertain, right? But there was a internal logic and this integrity behind the decisions, and whether it was at a business strategy or just a what do I do as a person today, right? Those things, that distinction was very clear, and that carried on. So I know people sort of want to get things back to normal, but to be blunt, this is normal. We've been doing this now for 7 months. So if you're not used to it by now, then well, you're a little bit behind the times. Right? But before it did become the new normal, March and April and May and even into June, there were these just continuous, is it going to change? Is something going to happen? For myself, the Institute, we're a fully distributed organization. Our members are in 94 countries, and I spend a significant amount of my time traveling. Now, there's all of these, it's like, okay, so we have a conference in May. This was the Vienna conference. All right, we have to postpone that one. And then it's like, okay, so we have the Paris conference in October. Can that still happen? When do you make the decision not to do something? So in September, we made a decision to postpone the Business Agility Conference in New York for 2021. So there is no conference in New York this year. Now, we had some people, it's like, yep, thank you. I would not be comfortable flying to New York, even as late as March. Because remember, March was like 7 months away, not 2 months away as it is now. Right? We had other people, it's like, no, look, it'll be fine by then. The vaccines will roll out. It'll herd immunity, ... Things will be fine. And there was a seductive reasoning for that, because we don't, the flu season lasts a month, it's 2. We don't have that cognitive history to sort of predict what will come next. So you're drawing, in our heads, we pattern match. And so some people pattern match and they hit, okay, the flu, it'll go over, they'll roll out the vaccine, a couple of months, we'll be fine. Right? But businesses, especially especially running a conference, because there is massive amount of investment that goes into hiring a venue in New York City. Right? So there was a point where we had to make a call. Right? Do we continue or do we cancel? And there's a cost to canceling, so it hurts to cancel, but there's a risk to continuing, right? And if things go well, obviously, great, like, it's all good. But if things go badly, like it gets worse. So we have to learn, and I had to learn how to make that kind of decision. That it's like, is it like 50 grand now, or is it 200 grand in March? Right? Like 50 grand certain, 200 grand potential. Right? Yeah. Also need to make a decision around people's health and safety. We're not going to, even if things are bad in March, we'd cancel in March no matter what, because like health, we have a duty of care to the community, and we all have a duty of care to each other, and that's a part of the human condition. Right? So you have to balance the duty of care, and then there's you don't know what's going to happen. Right? So in the end, we did make the decision to cancel, and part of it was that duty of care, but part of it was agility. Right? If we cancel, we have more options in March. If things get better, we can still do something. Right? It won't be the big event that people are used to. We could do, and we sort of had this sort of back of the envelope. We could do like a back in business kind of friendly gathering. Right? One day, let's go New York City, or pick another city even, and go grab drinks. Yeah. Right? Or we could put on sort of a hybrid event. So it gave us options. Whereas and even though it cost us, not canceling, right, meant that we had no options. Right? We were locked into, or more accurately, we had one option, which was to cancel at a later stage. Right? It was to run it or cancel it later. Right? So
I love the lens of looking at when you have more options for agility.
Yeah, that I was just going to say that's really good to to show that, and I love that canceling gave you more options, right? That's a really good. I just wanted to be cognizant of everybody's time. I just looked at the time. We have 2 winners for the signed book, so I want to make sure I announce those right now. We have Sarah Nichols and Allison Pollard. Both of you, if you want to chat with Patty in chat, and go ahead and give her your address. Congratulations to Allison and Sarah for winning a signed copy of the Art and Science of Facilitation. Marsha, I want to give you an opportunity to thank your panelists for being here, and then I'm going to wrap it up and tell everybody about our next conversations that we'll be having. Go ahead, Marsha.
I just want to say thank you. This conversation has taken me all the way back to, you were literally the last people that you and a whole bunch of people at the conference that dwindled very quickly, but it was so memorable, and I miss it. So thank you for taking the time to come chat with me today about just facilitation and business agility and the conference, and I think the lessons there. So thank you very much.
That's awesome. And I actually have one more quick question for each of you. Zuzi and Evan, if you had to pick one, would you say I'd rather be facilitating or I'd rather be participating?
Zuzi?
I guess I'd rather be facilitating.
Okay.
So
But it's
I'd rather
tough sometimes.
I'd rather be participating because it's facilitating is hard work, and I'd like to enjoy the rewards of being facilitated.
All right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So thank you. I want to just go ahead and thank both of you for being here. Marsha, thank you for creating the space for all of us to learn more about facilitation, about the Agile space, and about business agility today. I certainly have learned a lot, and I hope that those of you who are still with us today at the end of this webinar have learned quite a bit like I did. It's been fascinating for me to dip my toe into the Agile space. So for those of you who are not familiar with it and were here with me learning about it, it was super eye-opening and fascinating to learn more about facilitation. I want to say a final thank you to everybody and to the TeamCatapult team that's behind the scenes helping us pull this off, this virtual book tour. We have several more stops for those of you who are watching this live or watching this on the replay soon. Next week, we have actually 2 different conversations that are going to be happening. On January 27th at 12 Eastern, we're going to talk about Beyond Facilitation, a conversation with IC Agile, with Shannon Even, Christina Hardicane, and Michael Holton. That will happen again through the same link that you showed up here with artandscienceofacilitation.com/tour. I know Patty will be happy to show you the link in chat if you need it. And then the next day, on Thursday, January 28th at 12 Eastern, we're going to talk about leadership is a conversation, the importance of facilitating collaborative conversations with Ahmed, Deborah, Lisa, and Trisha. So that should be another wonderful conversation. We invite you to come back to this space, come back to Zoom with Marsha and learn more about facilitation, about the book, and have a conversation with these other leaders in the Agile space. Thank you so much, Evan. Have a great, wonderful Thursday. Right? No, Wednesday for you. It's already Wednesday.
Wednesday already, yeah.
It's late at night for you. We appreciate you being here as well.
Yes.
And thank you so much for everybody for being here. Just as a reminder, the Art and Science of Facilitation is available at Barnes & Nobles. It's available online on Amazon. We'd love for you to leave a review if you have not done so. If you have read the book, it's for sale. There's also an opportunity to buy a signed copy if you didn't win today. That's an option as well. Marsha would love to send you out the book. There's a button right there on our website for you to purchase it that way. And let's continue the conversation about facilitation online. Talk to us on LinkedIn or Facebook. This is a very important conversation to be having with leaders in your community, and we invite you to come into that space with us. Thank you again, Zuzi, Evan. Thank you, TeamCatapult. Thank you, Marsha, for writing this book and bringing all of us together here today.
Welcome. Thanks, Zuzi. Thanks, Evan. It was great to be with you.
Thank you.
So thank you again. We're going to be ending this webinar in just a second. We appreciate you being here. If you have any further questions, you may go ahead and ask that in the chat. Patty is still here for support, and join us next week. We'd love to have you for the next conversation on the virtual book tour.